So good evening, everybody. My name is James Kenny. I'm the Cabinet Secretary for New Mexico Environment Department. Welcome here tonight for our public meeting, our public stakeholder meeting. This is our second stakeholder meeting on this topic. We did one a couple weeks ago in Albuquerque, and we're going to continue around the state doing these meetings. I wanted to recognize that we have just a couple elected officials, at least that I heard were here. I see one, and I'm looking for the other. Commissioner Anna Hansen from Santa Fe is here this evening. Thank you for coming, Commissioner. And I heard Representative McQueen is here as well, so thank you for coming, Representative. It's always good to have the elected officials in the room with us while we're talking about these topics. So tonight, we're talking about produced water management in the state of New Mexico, and specifically outside of the oil and gas industry. We really want to get to our presentations, we really want to get to the question and answer, and we really want to get to the public input section of the evening tonight, because we want to hear from you as much as we want to share information with you tonight. So it is an opportunity for us to get together and to engage, to have dialogue, to have meaningful exchange of information back and forth, and we look forward to that. We understand that the conversation gets difficult, and that's fine with us. We're okay with that. We took this job, many of us knowing full well that there are difficult roads ahead, and we're at one. We also know that there are many views about oil and gas, about produced water. Our focus tonight is narrow. Our focus from the state is narrow on produced water. You are welcome to raise anything to us, whether it's climate change or things that maybe have a tangential impact to what we're talking about. So I just offer that up to you. And for clarity purposes, I think it's really important to just share with you up front that tonight is about engagement. Tomorrow, nothing happens. Meaning we're not making any decisions about produced water. We're not in an official rulemaking part of the process. This is all about stakeholder engagement. It's about talking, it's about listening, it's about collaborating. So we're committed to listening to you. We're committed to not only just hearing you, but to listening to you. We're committed to science-based decision making. I've said many times, whether we're talking about climate change or produced water or many other PFAS, many of the things afflicting or affecting New Mexico, that we're going to choose science over everything else, and that's what we're doing in this process as well. And then finally, what we're always committed to is our mission of protecting public health and the environment. That's unwavering, that's our job, that's what we do with everything that we talk to the public about and everything that we take back into this process. So again, welcome. I know it's not only you spending time away from your family tonight, you're spending time away from the World Series. I appreciate that you're spending time with us. I hope we're all Nationals fans. I knew that was not good. That might be the most controversial thing I said tonight. But anyway, we're going to move on, and I'm going to introduce Rebecca Roos. Rebecca is the Environment Department's Water Protection Division Director, and she's going to start us with the presentation. So thank you again.
All right, welcome again. Thank you, everyone. So I'm going to quickly introduce the other people you're going to hear from up here on the stage tonight. We're joined by Bill Brankard, General Counsel from the Energy, Minerals, and Natural Resources Department. He'll be providing part of the presentation. We also have Frank Scott, Statewide Programs Lead for the Office of the State Engineer, and Frank will be here during our Q&A session to answer any questions that are more related to the Office of the State Engineer. See if my clicker, I need to point it at the right thing. There we go. All right, so first we'll just do a little housekeeping, and then we'll get into the substance. We have the first 45 minutes set aside for these opening remarks and a presentation. We're going to cover, at a very high level, overview of produced water. We'll cover the regulation of produced water under the Produced Water Act, which passed in New Mexico earlier this year. We'll cover NMED's plan, the Environment Department's plan for Produced Water Act implementation, and then a quick transition into our Q&A and public input. And so we've got 45 minutes for Q&A. We do not have a break scheduled. I encourage people, if you need to take a break, if you need to stretch your legs, please do so. Move about as you need to. The restrooms are accessible through the courtyard off of the main lobby. So if you go out from our room into the lobby, the first door into the courtyard, then you'll take a right to go around to the opposite side of the courtyard for the men's room and the women's room. And other housekeeping items, if people would please silence their cell phones. We would appreciate that. And also, if you think you might be asking questions during the Q&A portion, people are pretty well filed into the front. We appreciate that. If others want to move up into some of the empty spaces closer to the front of the room, we welcome that as well. Another quick housekeeping note from the venue, this beautiful historic room that we're in. Please be respectful of the space. Don't lean on walls and touch the murals. Thank you. All right, so we'll do 45 minutes for Q&A, and then we have the last hour set aside for public input. And the way these two sessions are going to work, I'll talk a little bit more about in about 40 minutes when we get there. But just at a high level, and for those of you to make sure you don't miss any opportunities here while we do the presentation, during Q&A, we're going to do our best to just answer as many questions from those of you in the audience who raise your hand. And that's an opportunity for you to get clarification from us about anything in the presentation or ask other questions that you might have come in to the meeting with tonight about this topic. And we do ask that you respect the crowd and if possible, ask only one question at a time. And then if there's extra time to go back to people for second questions, we'll certainly make the rounds and do that. Then for the public input session, that hour from 7:30 to 8:30, we are going to go through a list of names of people who signed up as best as we can in the order that people signed up to speak. So if you didn't see our sign-in sheets out in the lobby when you came in and you're interested in making a public statement tonight, we welcome you to make sure that you get your name added to those sheets, and we'll do our best to get through as many of those the public statements, the people who signed up for that as we can this evening. We will limit those remarks to 2 minutes. I'll do a reminder of that when we get there, and that's to maximize that hour to hear from as many members of the audience as possible. Also, we are here, as the secretary said, in a more informal stakeholder public meeting context. We are not in a public hearing. We do have note takers tonight. There are these wonderful students that we have sitting over here with their computers. They're trying to capture as much as possible from your questions and your public statements, and that's all going to be part of a record that the Environment Department builds throughout the course of these meetings, and it helps to inform our work going forward. So we are taking notes and request that you keep that in mind when you speak and when you ask your questions, that there are people trying to capture what you're saying. But we also, because we're not in the formal rulemaking process or public hearing, we won't be responding to every comment or every remark that we receive. Our plan is, once we have completed this period of stakeholder meetings that include the 5 meetings on this slide, we will provide a summary document and make that available to the public that summarizes by topic and themes what are the things that we heard and learned during these public meetings. So we will be using the notes for that purpose, but not as part of a formal record for a rulemaking, for example, since that's not why we're here. And we have a few key meeting objectives that I want to cover before we launch in. And one of those is, we've kind of hit on this in talking about our note-taking. We're here to gather information. We're here to learn. We want to hear from the public and answer your questions, whether you've had burning questions on this topic for many weeks, months, or years, or you, in the course of our discussion tonight, have questions that you want to ask. So we want to have a dialogue, and we want to gather information from you. We also want to discuss opportunities to increase environmental and human health protection in our state. I'm with the Environment Department, and that's what I'm here to do, is protect the environment and human health. And the last thing on this slide is clarifying the work that we're doing, clarifying. We've got 3 agencies represented up here with your state government. So we want to provide some clarification about who we are and what we do in our agencies and what that means in terms of our work going forward in managing produced water in the state. Also, it's very important to us to emphasize that our public meetings, this is a very important part of our outreach process, but this isn't the only way in which we're reaching out and working with the public and getting information. We're also engaged in targeted outreach with tribal governments, tribal leaders, and we've sent letters to all of the tribal leaders in the state, the 23 nations, tribes, and pueblos that are located here, and we've reached out to those leaders and invited them into the conversation. We're planning face-to-face meetings with them. Some we've already had, others are in the works, and we're also participating in meetings with tribal environment directors in addition to the elected officials of the tribes, pueblos, and nations. And so we recognize that we may have some tribal members in the audience. We welcome your participation in this forum. Thank you for being here. We also wanted to make sure to point out that this isn't a substitute for our government-to-government communication and coordination. And with that, I'm going to turn over the microphone for a few moments to Bill Brinker.
Good evening, I'm Bill Branford. I'm the General Counsel of the Energy, Minerals, and Natural Resources Department. As part of our department is the Oil Conservation Division, which regulates the oil and gas industry, and as a result also regulates the use and reuse of produced water within the oil and gas industry, and the disposal of produced water, which we'll talk about in a second. My job is to try to give a very quick 30,000-foot overview of what produced water is, what's in it, how is it currently treated. This is something that could be the subject of a 2-hour lecture. And there are many people in the audience who know a lot more about produced water than I do, but some folks I think will find it helpful just to get a sort of sense as we lead into a discussion about what the legislature did this last session in adopting the Produced Water Act, what the Environment Department is seeking to do in its work in scientific research on this topic, and ultimately the fact that the legislature is now requiring that there be adopted regulations to deal with possible reuse of produced water outside of the oil and gas industry. So anyway, what is produced water? There's a legal definition of it. It's now, was originally in the Oil and Gas Act, it's now in the Produced Water Act, and it's now in the Water Quality Act. The same definition. All 3 statutes, it's defined as a fluid that is an incidental byproduct from the drilling for or production of oil and gas. Okay, that's a very broad definition, is intentionally broad to make sure that anything that comes up from the ground with the oil and gas gets regulated and gets covered. So there's nothing that slips between the cracks. That's why it is defined so broadly. As long as there has been the production of oil and gas, there has been produced water. This is nothing new. It has been around since the beginning of the development of oil and gas, because oil and gas was developed in formations that were once underneath ancient seabeds, and as a result there's water trapped with it, and the water comes up with the oil and gas in the production. Today, its best way to understand produced water is that there are sort of 2 large segments to it. Okay, and I'll talk about both of these. One, which is the predominant segment of produced water, is what we call formation water. It's the water that was with the hydrocarbons in their original formations and came up with the oil or gas. The second element, which is a smaller element but still very important, is called flowback water. This is water that was introduced into the formations through the drilling and then is pushed back up through the development of the oil and gas. So those are the two main parts of oil and gas. It's important, of produced water, sorry. It's important to note that there's some other kinds of deep water that people may be familiar with, brine water, brackish water. That's not what we're talking about here. Okay, that's an entirely separate set of concepts. We're just talking about the water, the fluids that come up with the oil and gas. They come up with the oil and gas, then they are put into these tanks here where they're just sort of mechanically separated. Oil, water, one is denser than the other. The oil is taken away and you're left with the produced water, which then has to be dealt with by the oil and gas company. And I'll talk in a minute about how that is generally dealt with today. So the obvious question is, what's in the produced water? Okay, so that's a lot of what the process that the Environment Department is going to be going through in the next few months, working with NMSU and other entities to try to get a really precise understanding of what is in produced water other than just water. Okay? So when you think of the two types of water, formation water, as I said, and flowback water, and you know, there was a recent study by Duke University that determined, at least in the produced water they were looking at, that the flowback water is about 4 to 8% of the produced water, but still significant because it's a totally different set of issues with each of those types of water. The formation water, as I said, is basically, as one of my colleagues referred to it, ancient seawater. And so it has all the constituents, all the minerals that one associates with seawater. How dense these constituents are vary from geologic area to geologic area. The produced water in northwestern New Mexico is quite different in the formation water from southeastern New Mexico. One way to look at it is it's salty, like seawater. How salty? Well, the water that you drink has a limitation recommended by the EPA of 500 parts per billion of salts, of total dissolved solids. Okay? Seawater ocean water gets up to about 35,000. In the Permian Basin in southeastern New Mexico, the produced water is often over 100,000. Okay? 3 times saltier than the ocean water. So that's among the issues dealing with formation water. Flowback water has a series of different issues that will need to be investigated further. And that is that when the fluids are used in drilling and in hydraulic fracturing, minute amounts, but they're still there, of other chemicals are introduced into those fluids to help move the water, help avoid corrosion, etc. Reasons those chemicals need to be understood, evaluated. We require that they be disclosed to us, but there's so many different companies with so many different formulas of different kinds of chemicals. All this needs to be further evaluated and will be done so as this process moves forward. So, how much produced water is there?
You identify those chemicals.
Yes, ma'am. That's part of this process that you'll know further about how we're going to look at that
You're not going to avoid what those chemicals and those pollutants and those radioactive materials are. You're not going to go forward with this because we will be in your oil and gas fields and we will stop this from happening. That's right!
What are chemicals?
What's produced water? No! Means no!
Water is life, fracking is death. Water is life, fracking is death.
Go back to Texas.
So,
Can I drink this water? Is it safe?
for every barrel of oil, we get 4 to 7 barrels of produced water. I mean, the answer to the question, how much produced water is it, is a simple one. There's a lot of it. Okay? So last year, New Mexico produced over 240 million barrels of oil. It was a record number. we produced over 1 billion barrels of produced water.
You're six.
Where's the storage facilities for 42 billion barrels of water?
Well, we're going to have a question and answer session. These are all good questions, but we'll go through that. You'll see some of these facilities here. This is all managed.
Call it poison water, please.
Okay, so this produced water,
Call it spoiled water or wastewater.
it's dealt with right now within the oil and gas fields. Okay, so of this amount of water, excuse me, of this amount of water, about now, what we're figuring is about 10% of this water is reused in the drilling operations and reduces the amount of fresh water that's used in the drilling operations. We'd like to increase that amount, but since there's a lot more produced water that comes out of these wells than water is necessary in the drilling, there still will be lots of other produced water. Of the other 90%, about 30% of that is used in what's called enhanced recovery oil. It's another way of reusing the water within the drilling. The other 60% is disposed of in deep injection wells. That is regulated by the state and the EPA. And so that's sort of how today it's used. As I said, right now, produced water is predominantly kept within the oil field. And so, with that.
Discuss me.
Okay, we have a few more slides and about 10 more slides, and then we're going to get right into the question and answer session. Okay, so I'm going to cover the key provisions of the law that brought us here, really, the law that we're here at the Environment Department and across the other agencies to implement. The Produced Water Act, sometimes you'll hear it referred to as HB 546. That was the bill number as it was passed in session this year. It eliminates legal vulnerabilities to New Mexico's surface and groundwater that existed prior to July 1st of this year when the law went into effect. We have more protections, and I'll talk a little bit more about that. It provides affirmative state permitting requirements, affirmative requirements for financial assurance from companies such that they're financially responsible in the event of a spill. And it clarifies liability for spills. It gives the state agencies more authority to enforce and seek penalties, and that then creates a deterrent effect as well. The law removes obstacles to recycling of produced water. Bill just described that only 10% of produced water that's generated in New Mexico is currently used for recycling in the industry, and that we want to increase that amount, which would then reduce the industry's reliance on fresh water. And this law removes some of the obstacles to that. It gives the Energy, Minerals, and Natural Resources Department much needed penalty authority. Explicitly requires that any use of produced water outside the oil and gas industry must be regulated by the Environment Department. It requires the Water Quality Control Commission, which establishes regulations under the Water Quality Act in our state. It requires the commission to adopt regulations for the discharge, handling, transport, storage, and recycling or treatment of produced water or any byproducts from the produced water generated in the oil field. It also doesn't specify what these regulations shall be, and it doesn't predetermine what the Water Quality Control Commission will ultimately establish as protective of water quality. So a couple of key provisions building on that last slide is that the state can now address the significant gaps in liability and penalty authority that existed. So this is part of why I said a moment ago that we have, as a result of this law, the ability to close some of the gaps for surface water and groundwater quality protection. The state can now develop more comprehensive information regarding toxicity of fracking chemicals. That's critical to our ability to ensure that anything we do going forward is protective of public health and protects our precious water resources for the long term. The state can also now issue penalties, and that goes into effect January 1st, 2020. A really important step forward for our ability to hold industry accountable. And then as we have this broader conversation, again, tonight is the beginning of a conversation around produced water management. Here are some of the priorities that we have in mind as we at the state agencies think about this topic. Our priorities include minimizing freshwater usage and increasing recycling. We want to decrease the industry's reliance on freshwater. We want to decrease the industry's reliance on underground injection for produced water disposal, in part to prevent induced seismicity. One of our priorities is to better address leaks and illegal dumping, in part through enhanced enforcement capabilities. And at the heart of everything is our objective, our priority of protecting water resources and human health. And in doing all of that, if we move forward in creating opportunities through science-based regulations based on research that we're going to be talking about that's going to be happening right here in New Mexico, then we also can help advance the state's aggressive renewable energy targets that were established under the Energy Transition Act, that includes as one point that all providers of energy must deploy 50% renewables by 2030. That's going to increase the demand for all of the resources that go into renewable energy production, including some constituents that some research and treatment shows can be recycled out of produced water that's treated from the oil and gas sector. Okay, quick couple of slides on our implementation process. Check my time, good, okay. And this is really focused on what is the Environment Department doing for implementation of this law. Because based on the way the law was written and that charge to the Water Quality Control Commission, their responsibility really falls to the Environment Department to work through a process to develop the regulations that are called for off-field use of treated produced water. So this slide covers some things that we at the Environment Department are not doing, and we'll cover some of the things that we are doing. We are not authorizing the discharge, handling, transport, storage of treated produced water currently. We're not. We don't have any permits in place for that. We don't have any permits pending. We aren't talking about right now, as the Secretary said when we opened, about nothing changing tomorrow. There aren't permits pending for discharge of treated produced water into our surface waters or our drinking water supplies, or if we put on crops. That's not what we're doing. And the last point is very important. We will never authorize untreated produced water to be used outside of oil and gas. There's no Environment Department or state authorization of dumping of produced water in any way, shape, or form. What we are doing is laying the groundwork to implement this law. We are partnering with research and academic institutions to fill the critical scientific and technology gaps that exist, those gaps are partly why we aren't authorizing any treated produced water to be used in our state currently outside of the oil and gas sector. And we're engaging the public to talk about the Produced Water Act, to hear your concerns, and we're continuing to try to develop more informative resources on this topic to increase the dialogue.
Mic check?
Mic check. Time's
Thumbs
up.
up.
Hey,
Hey,
Governor, are you listening? This process is a sham.
We are in a climate emergency.
We demand urgent action. Declare a climate emergency. Create a just transition fund. Pass community solar legislation. Ensure 100% renewable energy by 2030. And no more fracking!
No more fracking! No more fracking!
No more fracking!
presentation here just very quickly. It's important to us to explain what we're doing, and so that's really what I'm trying to do is explain why we're here and the process that we're in. And part of that is a two-phase approach for the Environment Department. We've set this up in 2 phases, and we're in phase 1 right now. We're having public engagement and outreach. We're engaging with the tribes, as I mentioned earlier, and we're collaborating with technical experts to fill science and technology gaps.
So you're gonna make rules for them to take the water, whether we want them to take the water or not. That's a given. They get all the water they want.
So we will answer questions very shortly in the Q&A session. Right now, we are not writing rules, and we haven't predetermined what any rules in the future may or may not include. That will happen in phase 2, where we'll develop science-based regulations, and we will keep in mind our goal as we move forward into phase 2 of down the road, and once we've finished our research phase, to create regulations that are protective of human health and the environment, reduce industry reliance on fresh water, and encourage science-based and innovative solutions to some of our key environmental and natural resource challenges in our state. And so I've talked a few times about the importance of research and how we're focused on filling science and technology gaps. Here are a few of our questions at the Environment Department when it comes to research. We're asking what contaminants are in the produced water generated in New Mexico. That is a critical foundational question for us to be able to move forward. We need to understand what's in the water. And that then would enable us to explore the question of how can that produced water be treated to be safe. We're going to explore the question of what changes would be needed to our state water quality standards to protect water resources and human health. Acknowledging that once we get more information and more research, more understanding of what's in the water, we may very likely expect to find that our existing water quality standards for groundwater and surface water protection are inadequate. And we'll need to address those gaps in the regulatory framework to ensure that any future treatment processes that are authorized by the Environment Department have standards behind them to protect public health and our water resources. So that's just an example of some of our key questions that we have in our conversations with the research community. And so in order to move forward in that process, the Environment Department has entered into a memorandum of understanding with the New Mexico State University just earlier this fall. And through that, New Mexico State is developing a produced water research consortium. There is a tremendous amount of great information on NMSU's website. There's a website link at the bottom. Also, I failed to mention at the beginning, this slide presentation is available on the Environment Department's website. And I have a link for that at the end of the presentation as well. But this site is a New Mexico State University site, and it includes a lot of information about the research consortium, how that's going to be set up to ensure that any research that is conducted not only meets the state's needs for developing sound policy, but also meets the highest standards of scientific integrity and in a process that's modeled after the processes used by the National Academies of Science.
Pay for it by oil and gas.
And one of the things you can find at this website is opportunities for interested parties, interested members of the public, and then if you're a technical expert on this topic, whether you're a general public or a technical expert, how to get involved and evaluate whether or not you want to participate in the Produced Water Research Consortium.
In fossil fuel production, problem solved.
Or the capitalistic mindset you have.
So the state agency contacts, some of these folks are here tonight, but this is a set of resources for you from the Environment Department. Myself and Annie Maxfield, who we meet in a minute, she's going to moderate our Q&A session and our public input session. We have Emerald Contacts, the Director of the Oil Conservation Division, Adrienne Sandoval. She wasn't able to be with us tonight, but her contact information is here, along with Bill, who you've heard from, and the Office of State Engineer contacts. So we each have different roles. If there are questions about the roles of the different agencies, we can answer that during Q&A. Then lastly, I will set us up to move into the question and answer session, and I have a few reminders and ground rules for how we're going to maximize this time together. We're a little bit ahead of schedule, and so we'll still we'll allow 45 minutes for the Q&A if we need that much time. We'll see how many questions there are. Again, we didn't have you sign up in advance for questions, so what we're going to do is once I transition and we bring Annie up to the podium, she'll do her best to call on as many people who raise their hands as possible. Please wait for a microphone. We have staff who are going to be in the center aisle with a microphone. We only have one traveling mic, so we're going to do the best we can to get to everybody and move as quickly as we can. But we do ask that you wait for the microphone to ask your question. That will help our note takers capture the question fully. And then again, as I said before, please consider asking if you have multiple questions. Ask one question, and then let's see if we have time to come back to you again before we transition into the last hour, which is reserved for those who have signed up for public statements. And then when we get to the public input phase, Annie can do a reminder on this too. Because we'll have those names of folks in advance, Annie will call out the names of people who've signed up a few at a time so that you can line up at the center aisle with our staff person who will have a microphone. And then we'll allow people up to 2 minutes per person to make their statements and try and provide as opportunity for as many people who signed up to speak during that hour as absolutely possible. So with that, Annie, I think we are ready to transition into the Q&A format. Thank you.
Thank you, Rebecca. As she just mentioned, I'm Annie Maxfield. I'm an attorney with the New Mexico Environment Department. And in order to facilitate our question and answer period, we've got a microphone that one of our NMED employees will take to members who have a question. I'm going to try to fix the audio first. One moment.
Test.
There we go. So there might be more questions than we have time to take, but we'll certainly take as many as we possibly can. And this is Lynette. She's going to be handing you the microphone when it's your turn to speak. And I'm going to try to get to as many people as I possibly can. The gentleman in the front row with the black sweater on.
I would like to know, hi, my name is Kevin Clicks, I live in Santa Fe, and I would like to know total aggregate of the water that they are claiming to put down the wells. It was very nice of the man to minimize produced water and say it's very little, but the articles in the paper say anywhere from 100,000 to 1 million gallons per well as they're having a boom in the Permian Basin. It's not all coming up from below the ancient seas, my friend. And these millions of gallons in a desert state, how many Elephant Butte lakes full of water are they putting down the brine wells first, like we're paying for in Carlsbad, to remediate as an externality? They take fresh water, inject it into these brine wells, then bring it back to make the water for putting into the fracking wells. Don't tell me it's all coming up from the ancient seas. That's BS.
Thank you, sir, and we'll get the appropriate person to answer your question.
Okay. Good questions. I mean, the concurrent wells that are being drilled, these horizontal wells, do consume fair amount of water. We're talking about 10 million gallons per well being used. We estimate at this point that maybe close to half of that water is in either recycled water or brine water that's being used.
Wait a minute. You said 10% earlier, now you're saying it's half recycled
No,
water. You can't have it both ways.
We got into confusion the last talk about this. Of the water that's coming up from the wells,
Not water.
the produced water that's coming up, 10% of that gets recycled. But the amount of produced water that comes out of those wells greatly exceeds the amount of water that's used in the drilling. So even if you just use 10% of the produced water for recycling, you're recycling about 50% of the water that's going in for the drilling. So that's why that equation earlier, that for every barrel of oil, you're producing 4 to 5, or maybe even more barrels of produced water. There's a lot more water coming up with the production than there is water that's going down in.
Water is not water.
And thank you, sir, for your question. And if I could see hands in the air, thank you also for stating your name at the beginning. And I would just remind everyone to make sure that you've got that microphone in front of you when you're asking the question so that everyone in the room can hear you as well. Lynette, right behind you in the green sweater with the black vest.
Hi, Linda Birchfield. Hydrologist Bell Turner has estimated that it will require one of the largest desalination plants in the world to process New Mexico's projected volume of produced water. Who is going to pay for this?
Hi, thank you for your question. Because of the podium, I'm going to stand so that I'm not blocked from everyone. What you're talking about is economic investment in the technology that would be needed, and as far as I know, it would be generally the private sector, in my view, that would be bringing in that kind of economic investment to build that kind of a facility. That's the example you gave is at a really large scale. If it was something large enough to treat all of the produced water that's generated in New Mexico. But regardless of the scale, we're basically talking about private sector investment in building facilities to do treatment. And we see that now for some of the produced water that's being treated to a lesser extent to then be recycled back into the oil field. There again, the treatment technology and the cost of setting that up is coming from the private sector.
Capitalist.
Thank you for your question. And
Oil and gas capitalist.
I see 4 rows back in the black.
Hi, my name is Joyce Bogosian. My question is, how can you possibly regulate produced water when all the chemicals or a lot of the chemicals utilized are trade secrets and are proprietary?
Thank you for the question. I agree with you. We need to know what those chemicals are in order to effectively regulate them, and we need to understand how those chemicals individually interact with each other so we can regulate that mixture of chemicals. So part of what 546, part of the legislation that was passed gives us the authority to create regulations. Some of those regulations that again, this is just brainstorming a little bit, could be the disclosure of information so that we can build the data that we need to understand what's in produced water. So that falls under the umbrella of the legislation that we could require the disclosure of those chemicals. That's been attempted nationally and hasn't worked so well. Many states, including New Mexico, require the submission of those chemical cocktails to a third-party database called Fracking. So I envision that our regulatory approach would be to solve that problem and try to get at what those chemicals are.
you. And I see a question from Gray Sweatshirt. Thank you for standing up.
Hi, I'm Uli Lepina. I'm a physician in Albuquerque, and I have a question regarding this. I don't understand the legal regulation on that. How you could allow a company to pull down substances that what we know is poisons our water, without even knowing what it is. If I would do that in medicine, I would lose my license.
And again, I'm going to agree with you that the lack of information that the state has about the chemicals that are used is a problem. And that's why we're trying to solve that problem with creating regulations that would disclose that information to the state. We can't make science-based decisions without the data. And
We can use medication after the FDA approved. I don't know why the companies can use substances before they approved from a regulating company, from a regulating organization of the government. I don't understand that rule. I don't understand the law. And I think there should be a law.
And again, I'm going to agree with you that federally, so we know that the federal government is rolling back a number of regulations. One that isn't rolling back because it isn't there is the disclosure of those chemicals. We as a state need to fill those gaps. And that's what, I can't, I've been in my job 10 months, I can't speak to prior administrations. What I can speak to is that this administration is trying to get at that information so that we can make informed decisions about regulations.
You try to stop it till we know.
And I will just remind everyone that there will be a comment period as well, and we do look forward to taking all of your comments at that time. And I see in the third row over here at the far side in a black jacket. Thank you, Lynette.
Hi, my name is Brian Deere, and I live in Santa Fe, and kind of as a follow-up to the previous question, it just seems like simple logic that if you really need to know what's in these, these lubricants and all these other proprietary trade secret industrial chemicals that are used in the fracking industry, how in the world can you allow fracking at all before you know? It doesn't make any sense whatsoever. It would, it's like, why are we fracking at all? It seems like, it just seems to me that, this whole thing is moot, that we're going through an exercise because we're already doing the fracking. It's been going on for years, and the state government is looking forward to 1 million barrels of oil a day for, and growing from there. I don't understand, I'm not getting where we're going with this, because it seems like if you really, truly, honestly are concerned about what those substances are, and nationwide, we have not been able to, any state, been able to figure out what they are.
Thank you, George Bush.
How in the world, why are we fracking? Period.
Thank you for your hands. We'll allow the panelists to answer the question, and then you don't have to get arm strained here. I will call on you.
The question was, why are we fracking?
Right. We definitely heard the question. As I said when I started, that some of the scope of the questions that we're going to ask are a little outside of what the legislature authorized us to do, which is look at produced water treatment. And I understand your question. It's a good question. However, it's just a bit outside of what we're here to talk about tonight. So it's not.
Produced water is within your regulations.
Right.
forbid it.
But the act of fracking is not authorized by the Produced Water Act. The act of fracking was
No produced water, no
authorized by the
poison
Oil and
water.
Gas Act.
Zero. That's it.
Yeah, it's a little bit beyond the scope, so I apologize. I know that's not the best answer
You
you
don't want
can
to
hear.
talk about rich industry? You don't want to talk about rich business people?
And I'll take, if you do have additional questions, you can put your hand up and we'll continue to ask them.
Whose side are you on?
Kenny, whose side are you on?
Please wait until I can call on you because we do have a lot of people with their hands in the air and we will try to get to as many questions here as we possibly can. So Lynette, since you are already over on that side, gray jacket, just right in front of you there.
My name is Teresa Seamster. I do want to bring this back to what your authority over this process is. One thing I didn't see up on the screen as an element that truly is ubiquitous, and that is radium. Any saline water injection that goes down the well is going to come back up with a fair amount of radium because the more saline water washes over a radioactive strata, which is what we're fracking, is going to release radium, probably radium-226. And this is a carcinogen. This is something that is a serious concern for a lot of people who have looked into it. There's a lot of new research on it, and I didn't see it on the screen. It is part and parcel of fracking because you are fracking with salty water. And the findings are clear that the radium is pretty much impossible to separate from the fluid that comes back. So that is going to continue in any part of the cycle that water is reused in. And I wonder if you could address that, because as I said, it was not one of the contaminants that you brought up. Thank you.
Thank you. I think Rebecca's checking to see, it should be on the list, but we may want to click through the list. I thought we had it. Yeah, the naturally occurring radioactive materials. But nonetheless, this is why we're appreciative of having the legislature authorized us to look at produced water so that we can then tailor our water quality standards to address the chemicals of concern. This gives us the latitude to go and look at produced water, sample it, understand what's in it. In New Mexico's water, right? There's a lot of information, whether you're in the Eagle Ford in Texas or the Marcellus in Pennsylvania. We need to tailor our water quality standards that are for our waters here in New Mexico back to the produced water so we can be as protective as possible. Now, the question of whether there is technology that will treat for the radionuclides, that is something that the research arm of what we've talked about tonight is going to look at so that we can better understand what's in it and how could that be treated. A very plausible outcome is that it can or cannot be treated. And that's the endeavor we're embarking on so that we understand how to move forward. So thank you for that question. Radionuclides and that whole sphere of chemicals is very important to protecting public health.
Thank you very much. And I see, Lynette, you are standing right next to someone with a hand up right there as well.
Hello, I'm Artemisio Romero Carver. I'm from Lamy, New Mexico, within the Santa Fe County. And this question is directed specifically at James Kenny, the Cabinet Secretary for the Department of the Environment, and a member of the Governor's Climate Change Task Force. So in understanding how we're going to be using or hopefully not using produced water, it's important for me to understand the industry that's coming from and how New Mexico continues to have a relationship with that industry, which I assume you can answer given your position. So I would just like to ask directly, you mentioned that you have this idea of reducing by 2030, 50% of those energy uses. Is there any plan proposed by state government to reduce the amount of fracking in New Mexico?
reduce the amount of fracking in New Mexico is the plan to transition to renewable energy. And that's the effort that we started in this administration, moving to the Energy Transition Act. And then the other plans that are incentivizing through policy, through legislation, and through rule to move further in that direction, whether that's vehicles, whether that's reducing HFC emissions or other, that those efforts that would take us into a renewable economy about energy would be the natural economic indicators that would lessen the reliance on fracking.
I think there might be a miscommunication because I think there might be a miscommunication because we spoke earlier last Friday and you told me explicitly that there are no current plans, like real plans, to reduce fracking in New Mexico.
So there's not legislation or rules to reduce fracking in New Mexico. There's legislation and rules to increase our movement towards renewable energy. So it's that movement towards renewable energy, that economic driver to move in that direction, that would diminish our reliance on fossil fuels and therefore fracking.
So, just to clarify, there are no existing plans to reduce fracking, but there is an existing plan, or the proposal of an existing plan, which we're not going over publicly, which I appreciate that, so we're not going over publicly, are we paying the people who create these pollutants, who create this waste-filled water, to receive that water?
Are we paying them?
When we purchase this, do we purchase the water outright from the fracking companies?
No. We don't purchase water. So the state of New Mexico does not purchase water from fracking companies. So the way it traditionally works is that that fresh water or reuse water would be used to frack a well. That water would then become produced water. That produced water would then be disposed of traditionally right now in underground injection wells, and that water, that when it's injected, there's a fee for injection.
So that's good for me to know. I think just the wall that I'm coming up against right now, because I do think that maybe you have the right intentions, is just that it doesn't seem like there's any explicit plans to reduce fracking, and in fact, you're finding ways to use the waste from fracking, which inevitably incentivizes further fracking. And I'm wondering how you can morally justify that.
It's a good question. The reuse of produced water, where you say it incentivizes additional fracking, what it's really doing, if we do it right, is incentivizing less fresh water being used for fracking. So it's actually, that is the reuse of produced water.
But the fracking continues.
But the fracking does continue. And as we move into the renewable economy, which we are on a path for, that renewable economy, moving that direction, would have the tapering effect of relying on fossil fuels.
Well, I appreciate you answering my question.
And I appreciate you being here. And I do have to say one thing that, coming to public meetings and seeing the youth of New Mexico show up to these meetings, I think that deserves a round of applause.
Again, so we can keep showing up, I hope that you would act to preserve the existence of future generations. Thank you.
To try to make sure that we get a good sampling of the room, I'm going to have Lynette start move to the back a little bit, and I see someone in the same design of t-shirt with a hand up right there. Here? Yes, thank you.
So Ruby. Hi there. So my name is Ruby. I am from the south side of Santa Fe, and so even assuming filtration technology is developed at the scale New Mexico needs to remove all of these contaminants that are going into our water, what is to be done with the toxic brine after we filtered it out of this water? Where does it go? Who does it belong to? What are we doing with it?
Good question. When I was going through the presentation and talking a little bit about what our implementation task is for management of produced water, I touched very briefly on byproducts. And one of the areas that we need to focus on in research is what the technology is that would treat, what byproducts would be generated, and what's in those, how would they need to be handled? Are there toxic waste, hazardous waste that would be needing to be managed according to existing laws and regulations to protect everyone from those constituents? Would new laws and regulations need to be developed? So we spend a lot of time here talking about the water itself, the produced water itself. I appreciate you looking at, asking that question about the other side, because we don't talk about it as much, but it's just as much a part of what we're looking at in the Environment Department as we need to be looking at that whole picture and not just bits and pieces of it, because any regulatory framework that we ultimately could create, if the science bears it out, would need to cover all aspects of the treated water and constituents. Thank you.
Ruby, can I just add to the question? That was Ruby, right? Yeah, there she is. You know, it's interesting, you know, if you really, when you get really into this, and I know this gets a little pointed head bureaucratic, and I just bear with me on this, because I think it's an important distinction. Those materials that come out of the produced water itself and the materials that come out of produced water, under federal law, cannot be a hazardous waste. Under federal law, they cannot be a hazardous waste. So the state of New Mexico cannot regulate those as a hazardous waste. I think this is really important. Are they toxic? Yes. Can they have a similar effect? Is a chemical that comes out of produced water that let's say it's like a benzene. That benzene is regulated at refineries as a hazardous waste. So why is it not regulated coming out of oil and gas as a hazardous waste? Because there are federal exemptions for oil and gas, wastewater, produced water, and those materials to be labeled as a hazardous waste. So this is why, again, I know people are not happy with 546, but there's a real opportunity, because now we can start looking at the state and saying those byproducts, those materials that come out, should we be calling those a waste? Should we be treating them differently? That is a little, that's going to be a little bit of a struggle between the federal and state relationship, but that is something that we can do as a state, and we can start evaluating it based on what's good for New Mexico, not what's good for the nation based on the federal law.
Thank you, and I will take a couple more questions on this side of the room here for efficiency for Lynette walking around, and I see that there's a gentleman standing there just to your left, Lynette.
Hello, I'm John Meade. I've been living here 30 years. I'm wondering why the fracking industry why they need any fresh water. They've got plenty of water that's coming out. Apparently, 7 times the amount that's coming out? They should recycle it themselves and treat that water so they can reuse it so they don't need any more fresh water. So that's one question. It also seems like the public is taking on the expense of figuring out how to deal with this instead of the industry, which has happened throughout our history.
Thank you. So we have tried to create in our rules greater incentives for companies to do just that. And initially, we tried these incentives a few years ago. Initially, there was resistance, but the companies have sort of come around to realizing that it's in their best interest, I think, to do exactly what you're talking about. So we're seeing a significant increase in the amount of this produced water that is being recycled in their own operations. We like to get it to as close to 100% as possible, and that's going to be some policy changes that we're going to go through this year to try to get there. But however, as I said earlier, the amount of produced water that's coming out of the wells is far greater than the amount of water they need to do the drilling. So there will still be more produced water to deal with, whether they put it down into disposal wells or try to make other uses for it. So it won't solve the produced water problem just to recycle it in the industry. That's the bottom line there.
Thank you, and I thought I saw a couple other hands in the back.
Real quick, I can add to that as well.
I'm sorry, I don't mean to interrupt.
As part of this bill, the state engineer's office is actively also working to encourage the use of produced water and limit the amount of freshwater permits that are given to the oil and gas industry, and that is in support of this bill. So the direction with all state agencies is to move these OG companies off of fresh water and to encourage instead produced water use.
There was another part to my question.
There
about
was.
The cost of the work that you guys are doing.
Sure.
To figure out how do you treat this water.
And that's a good question. So industry paying for that cost versus New Mexicans paying for that cost. And while we are investing based on the direction in which we were set in the last session to embark on a process like we're here tonight on, the actual notion of investing in that research, that is what the consortium is really focusing in on, trying to leverage federal public-private partnerships, federal money as well as state money, as well as industry money, NGOs, to really do that research so it doesn't become a burden of the New Mexico Environment Department. We are a regulatory agency, we're not a science research agency, and that's why we needed the help of New Mexico Tech to work on that. Oh my gosh, I've done it 2 meetings in a row. I have totally failed. It's New Mexico State University, and they're all looking at me very negatively. So sorry, folks.
Okay, thank you. And I'm going to call on someone with a rolled up shirt sleeve. I can't really see you very well back there. Thank you.
Thank you. I understand how it must be, I respect you guys a lot for standing up on a stage, holding responsibility for, a political system that you're not kind of sovereign on in any kind of way, and taking responsibility from the past. However, given that, just to go back to a question that came up earlier that I didn't quite understand the response to, if somebody were giving you a glass of water that may have poison in it, and they told you that in the future they were going to check whether there was poison in it and come up with a solution if there was poison in it, would you still want to drink it? And wouldn't that precisely be the question that you'd want to kind of ask them, like, hey, actually, I don't want to drink this water until you prove to me that it's safe in a way that I can really feel that safety? And so I didn't quite understand when you responded and said that actually that wasn't the point of this discussion right now, on whether we should have at least a hiatus on fracking, if not a ban on fracking. And if you could explain that. Thank you.
So, to answer your question, of course I would want that information as to what is in the water before I would drink the water. Understand, we all would want that information. The ability for us to know what's in that water is what we're embarking on now, so that we can set a path forward to require disclosure of information, understand what's in it, understand if it can be treated. It may or may not is the answer. So based on data, you may or may not drink that water, right? If there is poison in it, you can quantify that. The question about a ban on fracking, that is, I struggle with answering, because the reason that I have a struggle with that is because that is not something that the New Mexico Environment Department has the authority or can do. That is something that the state of New Mexico has to do. And that's come up already in the last session, and it did not pass. So that is not, I don't mean to punt on that, but that is not something that the executive branch, certainly not my agency can take on. I don't know if any of the other panel has any comments to that, but I appreciate your question.
Thank you. And Lynette, I see a raised hand in the row, but you are right at the end up there.
Hi, thank you. My name is Kathy Wooten. Is the New Mexico Oil and Gas Association financially underwriting this administrative hearing or any of the other administrative hearings in any way?
No, the NUMOGA and none of the oil and gas associations are paying for this tonight, paying for any of the our public stakeholder meetings. And frankly, I'm not sure if they're here. But yeah, so that they're not paying for it. are underwriting it.
The consortium.
Oh, I apologize, I misunderstood your question. No, to my knowledge, the New Mexico Oil and Gas Association or those associations are not, as an organization, paying for any of the research. Some individual companies are paying for research. I don't have a good handle on who they are at the moment, but we can find that out for you.
Okay, Lynette, I'm going to move you back down the center aisle here since I'm hoping that we can spread it out a little bit with the questions. And if you wouldn't mind coming, you are right next to someone with a hand up right there. Thank you.
Hi, my name is Diane McInnes. I'm from Santa Fe. I want to first thank you for being here because I've come off of, well, a very intense 8 years of fighting fracking in New York until we finally got a moratorium. And I've been through far too many of these hearings with the New York Department of Environmental Conservation. And I must say that listening to you is refreshing in comparison, especially to back in 2008 to 2010. But my concern, and I hear the concern from everybody here, is that we, meaning you and us, do what we can to be sure that the research that you're depending on is not in any way related to people who are in any way related to the oil and gas industry. Otherwise, your research will be tainted. And I'm wondering how you're going to ensure that, because what they often say is, well, who else would know? I know that we had toxic targeting back in New York with Walter Hang, who was very helpful, and there were a lot of people in New York at Ithaca that you might want to resource. But if you need anything, Diane McInnes in Santa Fe, you can look me up. I want to make sure I get an answer to the question about how you're going to make sure that they're not related to industry people.
Test. There we go. Thank you, Diane. And welcome to New Mexico. I'm not working well with this clicker right now, so we can go to slide 25, I think, which is in our Q&A slides. I didn't cover it in order to move the presentation along as quickly. I didn't cover this particular slide, but to your point, what you're describing is so critically important to us at the Environment Department and to me personally. Any information, any research findings that we rely on, we must be able to demonstrate the integrity of that research and the way that those research findings were derived in order for us to be able to make the best possible decisions. And so the Produced Water Research Consortium that we've talked about a few times, it's set up. I know it's got to be hard to see this in the back of the room, so I apologize for that it doesn't translate. But there's an architecture that New Mexico State University has created, and it's informed by the structure for collaborative research that's done. I think I'm too close to the mic over there. Maybe that's the problem. It's set up and informed by the way that the National Academies of Science do research, and there are provisions put in place by anyone who's participating in the consortium in a variety of different capacities to ensure that the science itself is based on independent research and findings, and that the results that come back to us at the Environment Department to make good policy decisions are of the highest possible scientific integrity. So I won't get into all the details of exactly how that's going to be. I encourage anybody who wants to understand that better to follow up on NMSU's website that I put up earlier. We have representatives from the consortium here with us tonight who maybe can answer questions at the end if there's time. But I've talked too long, so let's go back to the next questions. Thank you.
Thank you. And Lynette, I see to your left a blue shirt with a hand up.
Hi, my name is Scott McKittrick. I live in Albuquerque. What's your expected time frame for development of draft regulations?
Thank you, Scott. So we don't have a time frame. We haven't committed to a time frame to anybody. We've committed to getting the process right, building the science, getting the research done. Could I foresee a situation where we would want to maybe move on regulations that were prohibiting certain actions? Possibly. Could we maybe look at regulations that would somehow clarify what types of data industry is required to report to the state under this statute? Possibly. Are we going to move before the science is ready about discharges or treatment of water? No.
Thank you. And Lynette, I see to your right with a maroon sweater and a scarf, a hand up.
Hey there, my name is Shane Mulligan. I'm from Albuquerque. So globally, the people who are most affected by extraction practices and carbon emissions and other rampant capitalistic pursuits are the people with less environmental and economic stability, and not the people who did the work. And so I think it's quite clear that most people in this room do not want any of this to happen at all. But if you are to proceed with this immoral capitalistic pursuit, what work have you done to specifically identify the communities that will be affected by the work that you're doing with fracking? And do you intend to have any sense of accountability to provide transitional assistance by people who are displaced from these communities, or to do anything to empower them?
Sorry, we're having microphone issues. There's a foregone conclusion in your question that something is changing here that I just want to acknowledge as we move into it. The consultation that we're doing with tribes and pueblos, the consultation that we are embarking on here is part of that process to explain to people what we're doing and how we intend to move forward. We've done this with our methane rule as well, with our proposal around methane, where we've met in this kind of forum, as well as with pueblos and tribes. And then we've also committed to doing a social, the social aspects of methane regulation. I could foresee us doing that same pathway under produced water as well. The just transition question, I think, if I heard you right, was related to from moving away. I'm not sure where the just transition question came into play, because we don't have necessarily a path forward at the moment.
And just to reference a portion of your answer, you mentioned that you were having discussions with tribal communities. So that's indicating that these are potentially some of the communities that will be most affected by your fracking practices. Is that correct?
No, we're having conversations with all tribes and pueblos, because water doesn't know a boundary. So if just because somebody's in the Permian Basin or the San Juan Basin, doesn't mean that other tribes and pueblos who are in between those areas would not be affected. So we're having conversations with everybody. Some that are more obviously directly affected because oil and gas is within their neighbors to oil and gas, and others who are sort of downstream of that as well. So it's more than just those who would be directly affected.
Thank you, and we'll have time for a few more questions here. We do want to make sure to get to the public comment portion as well, which will start at 7:30. So we will take a few more just to make sure that you all have time to make your comments as well. So Lynette, I see a checkered shirt just to your left there. Thank you.
Thank you. My name is Brooks Bowman. I live here in Santa Fe, and I do appreciate your coming and talking with us. I think this issue is an issue that is yours and ours. We're all involved here. In your research, when you look at and finally get the toxic mix that's in our water, and you can't take it out, are you going to say no more fracking because we cannot take this out?
So speaking from the environment department, in that hypothetical scenario, if we get to that point and the research tells us that we can't take that out, then we will not be authorizing uses of that produced water outside of the oil and gas sector. That's the outcome that would have for us at the environment department, and is it would inform the way in which we authorize or not, and in that case not authorize uses of treated produced water if it can't actually be treated in a safe way.
But also, if they're going to inject that now poisoned water they can't clean, can that be stopped?
So injecting the water under current practices is under existing law, and I don't know, Phil, can you?
Sure. The injection is designed to avoid any contact with drinking water supplies. So if your drinking water is coming, say, from the first 500 feet below you, right now the wells that we're approving for injection are 15 to 18,000 feet below the surface. And so those wells are cased through any drinking water supplies to avoid any contact, possible contact between that water and current drinking water supplies.
Thank you. And Lynette, I see to your left, halfway through the row there, wearing glasses.
Hello, my name is Haruna Sabrut, and I just want to ask, stepping back a little bit, what you folks anticipated as the best case scenario outcome from this meeting is, if by your admission, you don't know what's in produced water, you seem unclear about how much of it there is, and you don't know how or if it could ever possibly be treated. So I wonder, what were you expecting to get out of this?
Yep. You guys have no answers.
Well, I went over some of our objectives at the beginning, but what we're hoping to get out of it is what's happening here tonight.
That we're bad?
Hearing,
We're bad. You knew that already.
hearing your questions, hearing the nature of those questions, the concerns that people have, the things that people are pointing out that is important for you, important to you that we are knowing about and thinking about. So it's not a huge, lofty objective that we want to come out of this meeting and have answers to all of our questions that we have for the research community, for example. Success for us from a discussion like this is learning more, being able to stand here and tell you where we're coming from in our presentation and answer your questions. And that's going to help us move forward in the process of understanding, making sure we're asking the right questions going forward and seeking the right answers in the right way. So, anything to add?
And look at you, I lost who asked the question. There you are, thank you. We work for you. It's our job to come and talk to you about this. I need to know if you're mad.
Is that true when the governor said a couple of weeks ago that you work for oil and gas?
Yeah.
The governor said we work for everybody in the state of New Mexico.
Especially oil and gas.
Oh, so, yeah.
I'm here tonight.
That's oil and gas.
We are working for you tonight. We're here to listen to you. Our objective is to listen, sir, please. Our objective tonight is to listen to you, to take your feedback, to be earnest and to be sincere in the way we bring that back and think about moving forward. Santa Fe and other places in the state, we need to go around the state and hear from everybody, and that's what we're doing tonight.
Why didn't you do that before signing the law?
We have about 3 minutes here left, and then we do want to hear from you, so I'm going to take 1 or 2 more questions.
After that one, why
So, I'm going to wait, please wait until I call on you and give you the mic. And I will say right now, since I am hearing a lot of questions coming from the audience, that we do have email addresses up here as well, and if you do have a question that's not getting answered tonight, then please email us. So Lynette, I'm gonna have you pass the microphone to, in the middle of the room with the hat.
I will still waste our time.
And then we'll do one more.
Time wasted.
Yes, my name is Mike Neese. So we know that we're running out of space for the injection wells. So we're doing the industry a favor by normalizing the use of a polluted water product for them, and to our detriment. We know that the industry is only using 10% of what they're producing. Why are we normalizing the use of their polluted product rather than first and foremost requiring them, and not just asking them or encouraging them, requiring them to use no less than 100% of the water that they use would be their produced water.
I think that's the direction that we're looking at. I mean, as I said, the previous administration encouraged this. I think we need to be looking more at exactly what you're talking about, is whether we can mandate this in some way, that use is being done in their drilling operations. One point though, you can't be 100% use of produced water in drilling because, for instance, when you initially drill through freshwater zones, you have to use fresh water, otherwise you're going to contaminate the fresh water. But that's a small part of it. I think we can get one company that, as we have spoken to, has gotten to 92% use of recycled water in their productions. I think we can try to get all the companies to get there.
Thank you, and I'm going to take one more question from the front row.
Sure.
Yes, that's where I'm going.
Perfect.
Thank you.
Everyone's talking about the water, but what about the air quality that we're starting to contaminate because of the fracking that we cause? And I honestly want us all to realistically look at the way we can stop and boycott fracking is to stop relying on our car and to start biking, to start skating, to start walking. I have been skating the last 5 years, and I do not plan on ever owning a vehicle at this rate because the climate is literally dying. And my question for you is, as well as, calling out everybody here, what about the air quality? We gotta look at that whole factor to things because we can put it in the ground as much as we can and just bury it or dump it in a well. But what about the air that we're breathing? That's being contaminated right now.
Good question, and the impacts are beyond water and they're into air, and you know that, I know that. So that's where we're focusing in the state on regulating methane and the volatile organic compounds that come from oil and gas production. So we've committed to doing an enforceable methane strategy that would reduce beyond federal standards what is being emitted from these operations. So that's happening, and that's been happening now for a number of months, and probably in the next year we'll move towards more of a regulatory process. We're in the same phase of gathering information. We went around the state, we heard people's concerns, and we're moving towards that inevitable regulation.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you.
And realistically, I want everyone to start skating, to start biking, to start walking, and stop relying on your car, and stop supporting these industries because you are the ones that caused the fracking to happen. You guys need to recognize that, and of course, we need to address that.
Thank you. And we're now going to move to the public comment portion of this meeting, and we have a lot of people who want to make comments, and so we've made a list. As people have walked in and signed up, we're going to go in that order. So it will be 2 minutes, and there will be a buzzer at the end. It actually sounds like chimes for this nice venue that we're in, and you'll hear that when the time is up. So I'm going to call up a few people at a time, and I understand then that we have some groups as well, and I'll call on those groups as a whole when I get there. But the first people that have signed up to make comments are Elaine Chimino and Marina Weber. So Lynette, if you could move down the aisle over here, please. I see Ms. Chimino is on that side. If you can be here with the microphone, please.
Can you call up the next 3 people so they can be ready?
Yeah. And I will begin to call in larger groups of people, but we're gonna have a couple people that are together as a group, and I want to do them all at the same time rather than breaking that up. So to your right is Ms. Chimino. I just want to see if you can make your ways down there. Thank you.
You guys should scoot up too.
Hi, good evening.
Scoot up. Scoot up closer.
First of all, I'd like to talk about a little bit about the impact on agricultural impacts on produced water. And one of the major concerns is the threat to air, soil, and contamination as a result of impacts on food supply, soil quality, and farm workers. Hundreds of chemicals that are unknown and known that are in or produced from oil and gas exploration and production. Many of these chemicals are known to be harmful, and we must work to protect our farm workers, as well as deal with the vulnerable health effects of air and water pollution. We have inadequate regulations now with air standards and water quality, and that's not going to be addressed in produced water. We need to address those issues. The disposal issue, 60% of our water being injected is a really big deal, especially for us in Sandoval County, where the state engineer had already approved 12 injection wells out in the brine well site in Sandoval County. So all of this is already being set up. A desal plant out there, mining for lithium, all of this. And they don't want to talk about brine as a possibility here because they exempted brine and they've exempted radium. So the issue is that when it goes down the well, it's exempt. When it comes back up, is it going to be exempt? And we need to deal with making sure that these issues are dealt with. We have many idle and orphaned abandoned wells that is going to also, is a very large hidden threat to agricultural areas. The idea of using fresh water, you have to understand that fracking is a shake and bake operation. Only 30% comes back. They can only recycle 10%. So all the fresh water is lost from the hydrological cycle. This is not being talked about here. So we have some very fundamental issues dealing with whether or not you're actually doing this to save fresh water. Because if that's the reason, then you shouldn't be fracking with fresh water.
Thank you very much.
And so I just want to, just one final comment is that we need programs and policies. We need statutory regulation that needs to be done by the legislature and not policy by a governor that can change on a dime. And we need this so that we can have safer food and agricultural systems. We can protect our health and safety for everyone from farm workers to consumers.
Thank you very much. And our next comment will be from Marina Weber.
Hi there. So I'm Marina. I started Global Me Express when I was in 4th grade. I've been doing climate work for almost 11 years now. I'm 16. So these are some of our kids right here. We have an after-school program all over the state of New Mexico for kids ages about 9 to 12 to do public speaking and climate work. And the biggest thing is that we are the ones that are gonna have to deal with the damages, I'm 16. I've been worrying about this since I was 6. And that's not fair, because it's not my fault. I wasn't doing anything when I was 6. And now it's these kids' responsibility to come here and to talk to you guys, but they didn't have anything to do with it. But they're still standing up because it's their mess that they're gonna have to clean up. So.
And I think that maybe you're turning over the microphone to our next commenters. Is this Sadie, Maisie, Isabel, Rafi, and Abigail?
Yes.
All right, go ahead.
Hello, my name is Sadie, and I am 9 years old. I am in 4th grade at Sequia Madre Elementary School. I am a member of the Global Warming Express program. I love nature. I love animals. I love going hiking. I love watching animals play. Fracking takes over animal habitat. When I hike, I want to see trees, not fracking sites. The wastewater from fracking contains chemicals that could give you or your children bad diseases like asthma or cancer. Fracking can also cause earthquakes. So let's stop fracking. Thank you. Hi, my name is Maisie. I am 9 years old. I go to Sequia Madre Elementary School. I'm in the Global Warming Express program. I'm here to talk about fracking. Many countries have already banned it because the wastewater contains chemicals that are bad for the environment, animals, and people. Do you want a fracking well in your backyard, making you and your children sick? It could get into your pipes and you would be drinking it or showering in it. Ew, I don't, so let's stop fracking. Thank you. Hello, my name is Isabel Taylor. I go to Sequia Madre in 4th grade. I am here to talk about fracking water. Fracking water is a terrible tragedy because when the drill digs into the earth, it could cause small earthquakes that still have big effects. If something goes wrong with the pipes, there could be something called an oil spill. In fact, about 9 years ago, there was a big oil spill in the Gulf of Mexico. Back then, it was actually known as the worst climate problem. And I would like you to think about, in 6 years, there could be a fracking site in your backyard. The process of fracking releases methane, which is a type of gas that, if it gets into the air, can cause terrible sicknesses like asthma or cancer, or even death for some people's children. Just to let you know, I wrote every single word by myself. Thank you.
Hello there. My name is Sierra, and I sign my name like this, Sierra. I'm 10 years old. I'm sorry, let me see. Okay. I am an environmental activist and part of the Global Warming Express. And I want to talk about fracking and why it is so dangerous. Well, when we make shale, when water goes into the rock and we make shale, it damages our water. And I want the adults to talk about our needs and not their wants. Really, why is fracking important except for profit and money? That's it. So our Earth has 70% water, and our drinking fresh water is only 2.5%. Water is limited. We need you guys to protect our future. Thank you.
Hello, my name is Abigail. I go to Sequia Madre. Global warming is a real thing. Fracking is a real thing. Fracking can not only cause can help us, but it can hurt us and the earth way, way more. Fracking can cause earthquakes and sinkholes. That could affect everything. The sinkholes and earthquakes cost so much money to fix. Also, we clear out more trees and homes for animals and us each day, and the more trees we cut down, the less and less chance we have of clean air and water. Also, life does not revolve around money. And by the way, an adult didn't come in here and make me say this.
Can everyone hear me? My name is Dustin Brownlow, CEO of Untitled Water Management. We're a third-party water management company, so if anyone is going to be treating water, putting it back into reuse in the oil and gas sector, or getting it out to ag application, it will be companies like ours.
Hold the mic like this.
I got it right there. I do talk with my hands, sure, that's right. So for us, just so the public understands where companies like ours come from, the first and best use for produced water is back into industry. That's the cheapest, most economic way to get produced water back out of the door, and then to relieve the impact of oil and gas drilling and fracking on groundwater. There really is no reason to use groundwater. You're absolutely correct in that. And there's plenty of produced water out there to supply the completion demand and fracking demand for the oil and gas activity. But I brought about 200 business cards with me tonight. Anyone that wants business cards, wants to email me or call me or talk off to the side, we're glad to talk. Yeah, there's a lot of companies like mine out there. But just very quickly, to address a few comments that have been made or questions that I've asked, private sector will pay for the water treatment facilities out there, whether it's going back into the oil and gas sector or whether or not it is eventually desalinated and put to other uses. Again, for us, first and best use is industry, which is oil and gas industry. Second and best use is maybe rare earth minerals or things of that nature to extract from the produced water to then put that towards the energy transition as that unfolds, hopefully over the next 20 or 30 years. And from there, it would be disposal and things of that nature. But for us, tier one is back into industry. As far as radium is in produced water. It's in produced water all over the world. We've been doing this globally for many years. Some of our colleagues are in Muscat, Nigeria right now, addressing produced water issues. Very rarely is radium an issue, though. It does happen, and the only time I've had an issue with it personally was in Canada, and that was addressed and treated appropriately, managed appropriately. But again, I just wanted to introduce myself. We are the groups and the folks that will be out here doing the work if the work is done. No, you won't. No, you won't. No. Again, if the work is performed, the folks behind us. again, I'm here. I've got cards. If anyone wants them before I leave, feel free to ask. If anyone has questions, feel free to pull me off to the side or email me or give me a shout.
Thank you very much. That was exactly 2 minutes, and I will just remind you to please be respectful to all the members that have come here to comment today. And Linda Birchfield, it is your turn.
Reuse of produced water for fracking injection can be a win-win, as it reduces the need for fresh water and reduces the need to dispose of produced water. So far as I know, the only drawback to reusing produced water is toxins would become very concentrated and require very secure storage, preferably in above-ground stainless steel tanks. If pits are to be used, I strongly urge New Mexico to reinstate the pit rule. However, using produced water made up of ancient, oily, reactive brines mixed with fracking chemicals to discharge into aquifers, irrigate crops, or provide drinking water is crazy. Before it can be used for sensitive purposes, we must first know, number one, all constituents included in a fracking mixture. Trade secrets can be protected by concentration. We need, number two, chemical detection methods for all of the chemicals. 3, effective treatment methods. 4, water quality standards. And perhaps the biggest treatment problem is desalination, as produced water is 3 to 4 times more salty than seawater, and New Mexico pumps out 105 million gallons of produced water per day. As a point of reference, the largest desal plant in the U.S. is outside San Diego, costs $1 billion, and can treat 50 million gallons a day, which means New Mexico would need at least 2 of these billion-dollar plants to treat all of their water. And I have a question. I hear the term renewed water, and I wonder if industry plans to naturally recharge all the produced water. And if not, it's just greenwashing, and I urge you not to use that term. You lose credibility.
Hi everyone, my name is Rebecca Sobel. I'm the Senior Climate and Energy Campaigner for Wild Earth Guardians. I first want to address, there was one comment that you just said really recently that really rubbed me wrong, and I hope that you misspoke. You said that you need fresh water to drill down to frack the well, because if you didn't have fresh water, it would be, you would contaminate drinking water sources. And that really confused me, because water, produced water, right, and oil and gas and come back up the same way they went in when they frack. So if we're concerned about what happens when they go down, why are we concerned about what happens when it comes up? So there's that question. But what's produced water? Water! Yeah, that's my concern too, because we keep loosely slipping. First we say produced water is water, it's recycled water, it's a byproduct that's simply, we're slipping and we're just calling it water. I call produced water fracking waste because that's what it is.
Yes.
And New Mexico has a fracking waste problem.
Yes.
Yeah. The solution to the industry's waste problem is not to offload it on New Mexicans into our river streams and onto our crops.
Yeah.
So, there's like, can you all raise your hand if you were at the Roundhouse earlier today? Yeah. That's awesome. I don't know if everybody in this room knows that there was a group, a large group, 100 plus people plus 20 that sat in the governor's office right now demanding climate action. To put your time and your bodies on the line to protect the kids that smoke, to protect our clean air, to protect our water. And I don't know why, with the legacy of downwinders, with the legacy of uranium mining, why we would ever entertain becoming a fracking waste dump ground. We can say there's so much money that New Mexico is getting from oil and gas, but until the governor starts meaningfully taking transition seriously and working to stop fracking and diversify our economy from oil and gas, that's not meaningful climate action. So let's not let them relabel fracking waste as water and make it easier to shove down our throats. Let's stand up. Thank you. After me, I think we're going to have a couple of youth speakers that were actually participating today with the governor.
Thank you, and we do have the speakers that are next, I believe, are the ones that you were referring to, Rebecca, and they are, and I hope that I'm getting your names right, or at least reading the handwriting in front of me correctly, Faith Pennell Sutton, Nayeli Solcis, Triana Reed, and Chavez Griffiths. If you would like to come up, we'll take you in that order. Faith Pennell Sutton.
I would just like to say, as one of the demands for Yucca, at least until we research the data points and come up with that data, can we at least put like a moratorium on fracking so we stop producing all this unknown?
Hello, my name is Yang. I am a Diné youth from Farmington, New Mexico, and I am a visual artist at New Mexico School for the Arts. And I am one of the 11 steering committee members, a part of Youth United for Climate Crisis Action. I am a spokesperson and representative of my indigenous people, and I have come to you today to tell you about how my people and I have been affected by the desecration of land for profit before I was born. My people have been systematically targeted in this corruption of unsafe and unjust economic development for extraction of resources. This concern is included in our declaration of climate emergency, a helpful resolution that we, the youth, have drafted for the Earth crisis. We created this list of demands to ensure that our state officials listen to the youth who have been heavily impacted by the climate desecration. I went back home to Farmington for 1 week, as this would never be the same for me. This day made history in the waters of pollutants. The dark cloud of chemical pollution left its mark in the water, which turned the water as pigmented as the color mustard yellow. The waters I used to swim in are no longer safe to dip your toes in, let alone grow agricultural crops and feed your livestock. Iron and aluminum are the majority of toxins in the Animas River waste caused by the Gold King mine spill in 2015. Farmington is home to 2 coal plants, which is one of the most impacted areas in New Mexico. This risky approach is in order to support the big cities and corporations. But in these reservation homelands, there is fracking tactics implemented, oil and gas barrels that reside all over, and there is no adequate food, shelter, water, or medicine, to name but a few, as well as the air pollution that surrounds causing related health problems. We need to make an adequate transition to justice that requires frontline communities who have been affected by extracted fossil fuels epidemics and are in mobilization efforts of the levels of government to benefit this transition of renewable energy economy. We have a decade to drastically reduce our carbon emissions or face the existential threat, and we do not need IPCC reports to let us know that our climate is changing through drought, water scarcity, and wildfires. This impact hits our land-based communities the hardest, and the science is clear. We only have a few years left to rapidly shift to a carbon-neutral economy to a sustainable transition, or all extinct. The extraction of fossil fuels in New Mexico poses a threat to our future, and we recognize that our state is ripe with potential for renewable resources. New Mexico can be a leader in this necessary shift to a carbon-neutral economy with the leadership of our elected officials.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Yeah.
Fuels are settler colonialism.
signed up to speak, so we do ask that you respect the other people that have come to attend this meeting tonight as well. Thank you for cheering for them, and we also do have a number of other people.
I'm sure you
around
love
the
cutting
room
out
that we
Audition's
want to get
voices.
to. And our next commenter will be Triana Reed.
She's not here.
And if she's not here, the next person on the list is Chavis Griffiths. I hope I'm pronouncing your name correctly. I'm going to call up, then, having not seen either of those individuals, I'm going to call up the next 4 people to give comments, who are Galen, Cindy Wheeler, Maya King, thank you, and Melissa Troutman. Galen Hecht.
Hi. Is this working? Can you guys hear me? No. Oh, that turn it on? That's an easy mistake. There we go. Okay, hi. I don't have a lot to say. I was here, I was at the sit-in before. I firstly just want to thank the elders who made such a sacrifice for youth, so that the people who are making the actual sacrifices, the actual action, so that I can live in a livable world. I don't have a lot to say. I just want to say a few things about my feelings. I know that this is politics and we don't talk about the feelings, but there are 3 main things that I am right now. Firstly, and predominantly, I am scared, because I want to have the possibility of having grandkids. I want to live past 50, you know? I want to invest in invest in things and feel like that matters in any way, because it won't be like the economy doesn't exist in 50 years. That would be nice. Yeah. But other than scared, I'm tired. It's been a long day. I'm also tired because I keep hearing euphemisms. All I've heard tonight are euphemisms and redirections. We're talking about poison water from a poisonous industry on our land. And you can't talk about it in any other way, or else that's just lying.
Thank you, Cindy Wheeler.
Hi, I'm Cindy Wheeler. I'm from Santa Fe. I don't know who I'm talking to, but I'm so damn proud of the voices of our youth. I also compliment you on your commitment to including the public and to using science. But there's clear that we have an element in the room. Secretary Kenny, you implied that as our state commits to more renewable energy, the market for fracking will fail. And with all due respect, this is not what will happen. The fossil fuel industry will continue fracking to sell out of state or to other countries. The industry has already stated on the news that it will still frack to turn hydrocarbons into plastic. I respectfully ask that you pass this disconnect in logic that everyone in this room sends to the governor. Thank you.
Thank you. Maya King Clarity.
Thank you. My name is Maya King Flaherty. I am with the Sierra Club Rio Grande chapter in Albuquerque. And I also want to just thank our youth and our voices that are here, because ultimately it's their future that's at stake, as it is ours now. And before even considering crafting rules for how produced water can potentially be used outside the oil fields, we need to close and understand the gaps we don't know. We know that produced water contains chemicals that impact public health, like radium, which was mentioned earlier, in which there are no acceptable treatment levels of removal from produced water. Furthermore, we believe that any research should not be funded by industry. And we understand that these listening sessions precede any rulemaking, and think outside oil field use should not be a consideration at all for the process. And among the many reasons people are angry is that fresh water is our most precious and is a finite resource. That it's heavily used for oil and gas extraction, and the fact that produced water, we've been having a discussion for treating it and commoditizing it to be used for uses that can potentially impact our health it's enraging. Any consideration of produced water reuse outside the oil field should be eliminated, And I think the only real solution to our produced water problem is to reduce, phase out oil and gas extraction, because that's what created the problem.
Thank you. And next will be Melissa Troutman, and then after Melissa Troutman, if we could have John Goldstein, Brian Deere, Walter Barger, and Joe Zuban come up.
I got called and then skipped over, so I'm just gonna go.
Wait, I'm sorry, what was your name?
Galen Hecht.
Okay, I'm very sorry about that.
That's right.
Thank you for going now.
Hi everyone, I'm Galen Hecht. I work for Living Rivers in New Mexico with Wild Earth Guardians. When I was a kid, there was a riddle I heard that resonated tonight. Two people walk into a diner and they sit down at a booth. They both order waters, one with ice and one without. 30 minutes later, one of them is dead. Does anyone know why? Fracking! The ice was poisoned. And we're here tonight because the ice is melting. The ice is melting and frack water is coming to our water supply in New Mexico. This is a violation of public trust. There are already accidents. Frack water is already contaminating water sources in this state. What we need are living rivers. We need living communities with healthy water so that our children can grow up without the threat of cancer looming over their heads. We have rollbacks of the Clean Water Act coming at us from the feds. We have a state government who is promoting an industry that is destroying our future, causing mass extinctions. You said you're going to listen to the science. The science says the earth is warming. We're losing water in this part of the world. Yes. Do we want frack water? No! What is it? The simple truth is we need to end fracking in New Mexico. We need to end it worldwide. We need a just transition, and that's why we're all here tonight.
Thank you. And next we will hear from Melissa Troutman.
Hi everybody, I'm Melissa Troutman. I am a research and policy analyst at Earthworks. And Earthworks has submitted written comments with a lot of research, blah, blah, blah. Y'all can read it later. I'm also from Pennsylvania, so I came here all the way from Pennsylvania last night. And I also live on the front lines of fracking. There are 3 well pads next to my family's home, but there's also a wastewater storage facility. And they use that produced water to refrac wells. So what does this mean for my family? It means constant 24/7 truck traffic. So much so that my elderly grandparents have not slept through the night in over a year. That said, I am really appreciative of everyone that is here to push for a just transition and a ban on fracking. Amen. However, I want you to think about something. I live 10 minutes from the New York border where they banned fracking. They banned it. There's no fracking. You know what they didn't do?
They didn't stop using it.
Well, that, and they also didn't shore up their waste regulations. So they still take the waste from Pennsylvania, and they still put it on their roads for de-icing without testing for radium. And so I want you to think about this. Let's say that in New Mexico, fracking is banned yesterday. Yeah! Woohoo, right? Awesome. What's going to keep happening for the next 30 years? You still have the poison waste coming out of the wells that were drilled before. What are you going to do with it? So, you guys have an opportunity to pass prohibitive regulations to protect public health and the environment even after this thing is over. And that is a just transition, okay? After fracking's done, the communities living near these facilities are protected as well long after the last well is drilled.
Thank you. Next we'll hear from John Goldstein.
Thank you. I want to start by also recognizing all the youth that are here tonight. It is awesome to see so many of you guys here, and it gives me hope. My name is John Goldstein. I'm Director of Regulatory and Legislative Affairs of Environmental Defense Fund. EDF commends New Mexico for proactively addressing water scarcity challenges. However, we're very concerned that regulatory practices may charge ahead of the science in a way that puts existing water resources, in addition to people, at risk. In terms of reuse, the clear low-hanging fruit is recycling for in the oil field operations. We supported House Bill 546 primarily as a means of reducing the oil and gas industry's reliance on precious fresh water. Ensuring recycling increases at the appropriate pace should be the state's top priority. There are much more serious and well-founded concerns about other theoretical reuse options outside the oil field. To be clear, transfer of jurisdiction over these more complex potential reuse scenarios to NMED was a good idea, but we do not support immediate regulatory action. The science simply isn't there yet. The recently launched Resource Consortium is a step in the right direction of prioritizing research prior to launching regulatory changes. This consortium must, however, incorporate all stakeholder voices in identifying its priorities and be completely transparent with its findings. Answering the questions that need to be answered will be challenging and time-consuming. The state cannot write protective regulations prior to better understanding the chemical nature of its own oil and gas wastewater, its treatability, and toxicological and environmental implications of its release to land and water. Such data is vital if the state is to be able to appropriately update the regulatory programs and standards that will demand review, including water quality, irrigation, and even drinking water standards. The process cannot be rushed, and it is imperative that the agency hold true to the phased approach described. Research first, then regulate, and do so only if research shows these practices can be done without negative consequences to the environment or to public health.
You're the problem, John. You got this bill passed. They never allowed us in the room.
Thank you. Our next commenter.
You're giving me too much credit.
It's your fault that we are having to do this.
Our next commenter will be Brian Deere, and please let's just be respectful to the other attendees of the meeting tonight. Thank you. Brian Deere. After Brian Deere, I have Walter Barger. I hope I'm pronouncing your name correctly. Joe Supon. And then the next four people that I'll call up, since I'm not seeing anyone answering to those names, are John Amundsen, Patricia Cardona, Bill Midcap, and John Carver. John Amundsen. Thank you.
Hi everyone, my name is John Amundsen. I'm the State Director with Environment New Mexico, a statewide environmental advocacy organization dedicated to protecting our state's clean air, clean water, and open space. Sorry, that's better. First of all, thanks to you guys for hosting this, and thanks for everyone for being here and sharing your concerns. I'm here today to express our serious concern about the potential use of fracking waste to produce water outside of the oil field. Freshwater is a precious resource for our state, giving life to our farms and our communities alike. Environment New Mexico shares the concerns of many of those here this evening that the overuse of fresh, pure water in the fracking process is a problem to be solved, but fear that using produced water for purposes like crop irrigation outside the oil field will result in unintended consequences that leave our state in a dirtier and more dangerous place than before. We do not know enough about produced water's chemical makeup and its impacts to move forward with the rulemaking process that permits its use outside the oil field. How effective are current treatment processes for produced water? Are they effective at all? What are the potential risks of the chemicals in this water to us soils and drinking water? Research efforts to explore these questions and others surrounding New Mexico's produced water are welcome, but our understanding is not nearly complete enough to justify moving forward with a rulemaking process that allows for the use of fracked water outside the oil field. Given what's at risk and the impacts of fracking that we already know about, I doubt it will ever be completed. In seeking to remedy one serious problem, it is imperative that we not create a cascade of new crises, not with our most precious resource at stake. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Patricia Cardona?
Patricia?
If Patricia Cardona is not here, then Bill Nitcap.
Bill Nitcap?
And then John Carver.
That would be me.
There we go.
Okay, so I took myself up in 1999. And I have a tiny solar system. And then just recently I added a tiny wind turbine. And I have so much juice. And what I feel I've proved is that in New Mexico, I live in a little box canyon with 75-foot cliffs around my house. And the wind blows all the time. Anybody, the wind blow around your house at all these days? Yeah, so wind and solar hybridity produces almost continuous generation. Tell that to your energy people, tell that to your environmental people, okay? If you have a source where you can get almost continuous generation for microgrids, we'll break up the grid we've got, you know, or we'll just go down to individual units, the way Tesla or Edison wanted it, right? That's how you produce energy, and it's clean. It doesn't produce any of this poisoned water, right? That these people keep calling whatever they're trying to call it. That is a euphemism, and you're right, that's lying. Lying is a form of euphemism, a form of exaggeration, a form of deception. Okay? So, when you have that clean source in terms of wind and solar hybridity, which is almost constant generation, you really don't have to store a lot of energy, you're just using it all the time. You're just picking the fruit right off the tree. Okay? And it doesn't take a lot. Hybrid systems of solar and wind will save us all of this trouble. We don't need any of these extractive industries. At this point, according to the IPCC report, put out by the world's leading meteorologists, fossil fuels are going to extinct the human species if we continue at this rate. That's what you guys are doing. It's not very smart. It's pretty stupid. You got the wind, you got the sun, you got everything you need. Okay? No more fracking, no more fossil fuel extraction. It's a crime against humanity. We do not want to go extinct. I want grandkids. I want these kids taken care of. I want these hypocrites to take care of these kids. And we have to tell them to stop fossil fuel extraction completely in the state of New Mexico immediately.
Thank you, and I'm going to call another group of 4 people up to get ready to speak, and those will be Simon Walker, Irene Weber, Norm Gome, Ariel O'Callahan, and Irene Way. And Simon Walker, you're going to be next after that. Irene Weber is the first one. Norm Gome.
Thank you, youth, for being here. Society needs you to hold the governor and the legislature accountable for the laws and the lack thereof that these state officials must operate within. You need to express your views to them. The laws need to be changed. These officials do not have the ability to change the laws. Thank you, Secretary Kenny and state officials, for taking this two-phased approach in holding these meetings. My name is Norm Gome. I'm a retired licensed engineer. I earned a master's degree from NMSU in water and wastewater engineering. Principles of wastewater engineering science are applicable to your rulemaking. Require the following information to be generated through thorough state quality control. Present the results publicly in phase 1 before you initiate phase 2. It should be a prerequisite for phase 2. principle. Know what you are dealing with. I've heard you recognize that. Your constituent list, however, on your slides, omitted the powerful cellular poisons and biocides that fracking water contains. Prior to rulemaking, thoroughly characterize the contaminants and their concentrations independently of industry self-reporting. Assess and publicly review the adequacy of the self-reported data. The governor's 2018 water policy requires knowing these things. Pilot treatment works must operate continuously and successfully with adequate state oversight for a substantial period of time, not a day or two, not in the lab, but a pilot treatment plant that's operated continuously for a decent period of time. Thank you for recognizing, Secretary Kinney, that these wastes may not be amenable to reliable treatment, period, and that there are regulatory gaps that must be filled first. Those are principles of engineering science that I ask that you respect. I now want to talk about values.
And I will just remind you that your 2 minutes are up, so we would like to hear from as many people as possible tonight.
I will be quick. The state engineer said that fracking is using more fresh water than the city of Albuquerque with huge growth projected. This is in an area of the state or areas of the state that are running out of fresh water. It's reprehensible and immoral. Please consider your role as a fiduciary for future generations, which do not have a voice in your process. Please confront the oil and gas industry's false narratives, trade secrets excuses, and deception. Thank you.
Good evening, my name is Ariel Callahan. I'm an environmental scientist with Collier Geoscience. We are the hydrology, geology, and water rights consultants for the city of Jal, located in the heart of the Permian Basin. The city's Jal well field is located in the Jal underground water basin, which has been depleted over time with additional accelerated depletions due to oil and gas activities. As such, the city is concerned about continuing depletion of the freshwater supply in the Pecos Valley alluvial aquifer. We strongly encourage the state to move forward on the procedures and regulatory processes to accelerate the safer use of the produced water and therefore reducing the oil and gas reliance on freshwater.
Thank you. And now we'll hear from Irene Way.
Hi y'all, I'm Madeline Carey and I just came from the governor's office where I was arrested by the very professional state police who are sitting in the back of the room. You should all give a hand of applause. I grew up in the Mountain View community. The South Valley of Albuquerque, so I know a lot of different police departments, and these people don't deserve it. I also grew up in the Mountain View community in the South Valley of Albuquerque. And that's why I went to the governor's office today, because this department has systematically failed that community. I know. I'm the rich white girl from that community. My family can test their water. My friends' families, they could fly to Houston to get their lung cancer taken care of. There's a nitrate plume. There's a jet fuel spill. There's 42 minimum petroleum terminals that have had leakage events in the past 30 years. The known environmental impacts of industry in that community started in the 60s. They exist today 70 years later. I don't trust y'all to pass rules that protect even rich white girls living in poor communities. And that's why I got arrested today, because I have the privilege of being healthy, I have the privilege of going to school, I have the privilege of moving back to Santa Fe to make your jobs complicated, make their jobs complicated getting arrested, but my neighbors don't. In this department, you've entertained rules like this for the past 75 to 100 years, and you've always failed the communities. So when you're entertaining this rule, think about how the poor are people who have recently immigrated from Mexico, the indigenous communities who have become poor by colonial occupation are going to deal with your rules. Both my parents have PhDs. I can read all your science. I got good grades in chemistry. I can tell you anything you want to know. Not everyone can. Not everyone comes from that position of power. So when you make your rules, you make sure it protects people with the least access, the people with the least amount of power. Because systematically, this department hasn't. It's been about enriching industry, it's about them finding a balance, and there's no balance when it's the poor people that have to die from cancer. There's no balance when there are people who have to get cancer. There's no balance when you say, it's fine, we'll pay for free college, but we don't know what the impacts are going to be in 30 years. My friend's mom, she spent her whole life growing up in the mountain community. 45, stage 4 lung cancer. She had fought Houston to have surgery. She lived, she survived. You know who didn't have that opportunity? My friend's mom, who's a first-generation American immigrant from Mexico. She didn't have that money. So I hope that when you're making these rules, you think about the communities who don't have the resources to work through this for themselves. And I hope you know your job is protecting the water resources of people from communities like Mountain View, and it doesn't take stage 4 lung cancer, and it doesn't take blue babies being born 20 years after the problem is identified for you to get people city water, because that creates other markets and it helps other people get rich, and it doesn't help communities raise their babies in the places where their parents raise their babies.
Thank you. And next four people that we'll hear from will be Simon Walker, Beth Korber, Joyce Bogosian, and Stephen Verchinsky. If the four of you would like to make your way down here. Simon Walker. Beth Korber.
Hi, my name is Betty Korber, and I was at the Roundhouse, and I was dazzled by this beaches and the passion, and I really appreciate your coming. And I wanted to talk about two issues. One is spills. We had a vast number of spills in New Mexico in 2018 of produced water or fracking waste. And there's not enough resources to look into these spills. About a month ago, I took a fracking reality tour with the chapter house, the Counselor Chapter House of the Navajo Nation, a 3-man volunteer who took people around to see firsthand what was going on. And one of them had his aunt living in a house where there was an explosion in February, and 42,000 gallons of poisoned water went down the beautiful little arroyo where there was a Mustang and the vast, gorgeous Navajo lands around us. But man, the smell of the nearby well was foul. And they knew 42,000 gallons spilled because these are all recorded very dutifully, but no one has come out to check their well. They have a well that's rather close to the surface. They said there were only 6 inspectors for the whole state to look into these spills. So this seems like alone enough of a reason for a moratorium until we know more. The other thing I wanted to say is I am a scientist. Actually, I've worked for 30 years on the AIDS vaccine. It's a really hard problem. Some of the most brilliant people in the world are working on this problem, and we don't have a solution. So I kind of am skeptical that this is a good idea to do the research prior to regulation. I think we should be doing the research prior to generation, because there may not be We've got to do the research. We've created a vast amount of waste, but we need to stop creating the waste until we know what's going on. We can't even figure out all of the chemicals that are in the water because of the industries keeping it quiet. But even the ones we know, you can't detect all of them, and some of them you can't detect in a high saline situation. This is science that's been studied for a long time. You know, they said it as if it should be comforting that we've been having produced water for decades. We still don't know how to handle it, and we're going to learn how to handle it quick enough to deal with generating another billion gallons 2019, 2020. No, thank you. We need to stop now. Think.
Change the law.
Change the law. Yes.
And then next we will hear from Joyce Bogosian and Stephen Verchinsky, and then we're going to be running right into 8:30 here, which is how long we've reserved the venue for here tonight. So we'll hear these two comments, but we would like to hear from all of you that didn't get a chance to speak tonight. Please do email us at the email address listed above. Joyce Bogosian.
Hi, I'm Joyce Bogosian, and I'm here supporting the young people. I'm very concerned. I will speak from my personal experience. First, I want to ask, have any of you done a fracking tour to Chaco Canyon? Raise your hands.
Yes or no?
Any of you guys? She's talking to you guys.
Have any?
Thumb up or thumb down?
I will speak from my personal experience. I went on the fracking tour to Chaco Canyon this past Sunday. The sacred Chaco landscape is being torn up with no regard for the Navajo Nation, who are facing massive devastation to their people, to their wildlife, to the groundwater. The fracking enterprise, we were told by our Navajo brothers, is fracturing their families. They're having health issues. They're arguing amongst themselves, all caused by an industry that are profit-mongering, taking advantage of our state, our people. And now, these foreign companies that are extracting oil and gas, they want to take even more advantage of us. Cleaning up the waste is a big problem, as you heard. Disturbing the aquifer, groundwater. Once you disturb uranium, radium, those isotopes proliferate. You can't get rid of them. So, we have so many people and organizations here in New Mexico with brilliant ideas as to how to transition, but nobody is being invited to the table. We can build a solid, renewable, sustainable economy and existence here in New Mexico. So let's fight, continue fighting, because we need to create a transition plan that we can be proud of. And I ask you all to join us in that effort, because to regulate this industry is a massive problem. Thank you.
Thank you. And we'll hear from Stephen Verchinsky, and then I will turn it over to Secretary Kenny to close us out this evening.
Hello, everybody. I have a deep amount of frustration here, having worked for EM&RD in the past. I also ended up, my name is Stephen Verchinsky, by the way. I have a MS and BS in Natural Resources Management Policy. Worked in the field and career for over 30 years, working for BLM, working for Department of the Interior. I now serve with the U.S. Green Party on their Eco-Action and International Committees. I gave my first climate talk about 30 years ago, and I gave one back in 2018 at the University of Utah for the national meeting. I am still at the same time period saying that we don't have a heck of a lot of time, and most amount of time we don't have is to wait for a whole series of studies to be done right now on something that is causing climate change. And even if it's not causing climate change, the idiocy of this industry is beyond compare. Idiocy, yes. The energy return on the energy invested, for example, when 1973 was about, we were looking at, for every barrel of oil that we used for energy production, we got 70 units out. That was huge. You know what it is now? For every unit of energy we put in, we get less than 3 out. And some people are saying that we're at break even. 27 fracking companies are the greatest ones in the United States. Not one of them is profitable. Do you know what they did in order to go out and get themselves profitable? They took out $1 trillion roughly worth of bonds. And they put those into our investment accounts, into our pension plans, etc. And so when the next crash happens, guess who takes the fall? It's not them. It's us. We even had fracking here back in the day. We had Project Gas Buggy. Halliburton we did. You know what they did with the well? They filled it up with liquid radioactive waste. And so now we have a legacy well in which we're monitoring springs that are feeding into Navajo Reservoir, which goes on to the Dene.
Colonialists. All them. Colonial
So,
pigs.
what are we up to, by the way, in terms of water usage? Your comment on top of frequently asked questions, it's not 10 million gallons.
Liar.
I was just on up there with Professor Inga Farah at Cornell University in Ithaca, New York. The amount of water that's now being used is up to 18 million gallons of water a well.
Tell it, Steve.
Okay. So what are we going to do with all these legacy wells that you're providing us with in the future for New Mexico?
Ask the liars.
What are we going to do?
Ask the liars.
What are we going to do with the fact that we're not running any even husbandry of these resources? We're not even husbanding these resources for the next generation. According to the professor, we have 20 to 30 years left because we have 1 million new wells that are proposed by the industry. And if we take 18 million gallons of water of frack, we're looking at over 10 trillion gallons of water. How much is that? How about put it into perspective? It's 1/4 of all the water in Lake Tahoe.
Tell it, Steve.
That's genocide.
Okay, so what do we end up doing last? Is this produced water is being proposed even for agricultural lands already at
I
risk?
would just remind you that we're over the 2 minutes and we do have to be respectful of the venue here tonight.
Just finish this up.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you. The agricultural lands are already at risk in this state. The state has no personnel checking the soil toxicity in the state. Why? Because the legislature hasn't given any personnel. Yet, you know what 1/3 of their personnel is being used for? That industry. 1/3 of them are checking the weights and measures at gasoline stations.
Capitalist pigs and sliding.
So it doesn't need to be done. So I'm saying that we need to go ahead and work a little bit better here for a sustainable future, and the governor and the legislature needs to get on board to get the job done. Thank you.
Thank you everyone for your comments tonight. I'm going to grab the microphone here and turn it over to Secretary Kenny for closing remarks. And please do email us if you do have additional comments.
What is your